voting for something and then looking horrible for doing it before you put your foot down and say, hey, I don't trust these people. You got the president of the Senate writing an op-ed 2 weeks ago about how we should all support data centers. A poll comes out literally at the same time saying over 75% of people are against hyperscale data centers. And you wonder, why is he doing that? And you didn't have to see that poll to know, hey, bud, this isn't... You may... From a sheer just political standpoint, whether you like him or not, just from sheer political, like just talking from a sheer tactic side of things, why would you do that, Robert Stivers?
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to a new episode here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I know it's been a little minute. Had a few things going on. I had my birthday and some other things going on that has slowed down getting out our next episode. But don't worry, we're back. Coming at you, a lot of headlines going on here, of course, in Kentucky. Obviously, a lot going on with the data center stuff. We're seeing a lot of cities backing off on flock cameras. And on the data center stuff, we're seeing a lot of interesting things going into play when it comes to these upcoming campaigns. Obviously, the 6th congressional district, Democrats have said is in play. Polling says it is neck and neck, supposedly. But we'll take a look and dive into all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Please make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, all those fantastic, great things. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So we've seen Republicans and Democrats here in Kentucky struggling when it comes to data centers. And by struggling, I mean literally struggling to message on it. Why is that? Well, first, you have to understand, if everybody loved these, everybody loved them, wanted them in their backyards, it wouldn't be of concern. They would be gladly running on it, right? Don't fall for any politicians standing up there saying, I'm going to take a strong stand against data centers, and it's just because they don't think for themselves. As obvious, like none of them do at all. As obvious when you look at some past actions when it comes to data centers and statements and now what they're trying to shift to. But regardless, the issue all of them have is they want these data centers. You've got to understand that. Every politician wants these data centers. They're like the best thing in the world. Because it doesn't matter. Left, right, Democrat or Republican, you pay attention to politics long enough, you realize they all want more power. With that, they need more money. Not per se money necessarily into their pockets, though there's plenty of that goes on. But, when people sit there and they say, well, what drives them? Well, they must be getting a payoff from somebody. It's not even necessarily that politicians are getting, per se, a payoff in the form of monetary benefits into their pocket. It's that their payoff is they get more power. It's power for the sake of power, not something where they're looking for some financial payoff necessarily in the end. Now, in politics, money does equal power, but that, once again, that doesn't mean you need to line your pockets. Anybody who's Kevin Spacey's character in House of Cards kind of lines this out well when he's talking about somebody who was working alongside him in Congress that ended up becoming a lobbyist, making a lot more money becoming a lobbyist. And he talks about how, sure, you can line your pocket with a lot more money, but that's not real power. This is how you get real power. And so when it comes to government, they want all of them. They want to feel more special. They want to solve more of your problems, supposedly. They want to feel more important. They want to get more honorifics. When they walk into a room, they want to be the most important person there. And they all go to these conferences and they go to these gatherings and all these kinds of other things. And they walk in and there's a mayor of a bigger city that's more important because they're slinging more money, right? The companies don't care as much about the small little city as they do the big city. They want to know how much money you're slinging around, how big's your police force, how big's your fire department, how big's all these things. And if it's not very big, well, you're not as important. You're not as special. You're not worth the time. You're not worth the honorifics. You're not worth the perks. And so they all want to be bigger, better, more money. You've got to understand that, because that's what drives this desire for data centers. Because you'll see the biggest selling point. You'll see this whether it's President Trump, whether it's even Beshear, whether it's some Democrats up until recently, obviously, or even Republicans, of course, too, as well. We just saw this like a week or two ago. Robert Stivers, president of the Senate, writing an op-ed talking about how great data centers are for one specific thing: more money into the government. When you ask any of these people, what is the benefit of having a data center in your community? They'll say jobs, but we know that's minimal jobs. They know that's minimal jobs. They're talking about construction jobs, which is temporary. But the number one thing they will go to, and even Beshear, remember just a few months ago, Beshear made this statement here about what these data centers can do for your government. Take a listen.
They also need to be upfront in how big the investment is so that people can see what the tax revenue that the school system, the county, and the state are going to get and what could be done with it. It could double the budget of many of our public school systems. It could help provide raises for teachers and educators that we haven't otherwise been able to. It could ensure that we have money for transportation that addresses a lot of those challenges and then provides revenue to do a number of other things.
So there you heard it. Beshear's laying it out. Republicans have said the same thing. It can double or triple these government budgets. That's the benefit. And they say that to you like they expect us to sit there and say, oh, yeah, that's right. That sounds good. Yeah, I want the government to have more money. When the government gets more money from new, tax sources, it's always turned out so much better for me in my life. My life has gotten better in the process. Now, remember they're selling the lottery to us? Look, funding for education will never be an issue again. Meanwhile, you've got places like Fayette County Public Schools drowning in debt, drowning in financial issues and woes, spending, $28,000 a student. Jefferson County Public Schools, they're pulling out loans. They've talking about selling off assets to make it work. They're spending $30,000 a student. I mean, these people are spending tens of thousands of dollars a student in education, and it's still not enough money. But remember when they told you, hey, if you just had the lottery, the education would be taken care of? They're doing the same thing again. They're saying, look, if you just let a data center come in to your community, not throw a fit, you rubes, then, we can have more money in the government. Now, there's a lot of legitimate concerns about data centers. I've talked about this in the past. And if you're sitting there listening to this and you're like, I don't understand, people are being stupid, China's going to get ahead of us with these kinds of things, you need to listen carefully, okay? There are real concerns. We'll go over here in a second. And people have these real concerns. Now, there's moves government could make to assuage those concerns. And it's not a pinky square promise that we're not going to pass this on to you. And I'm going to go through like a list of concerns and issues people are having with data centers that need to be addressed before we have this conversation in the community. And so if you really wanted those things done, if you're really worried about China getting ahead, and that's really what this is about, then immediately you would say, whoa, let's address these concerns right away. Let's get this taken care of. Let's Congress at the federal level, let's get them involved. Let's address all these concerns right away so we can turn around and ensure that we go ahead and, we can build these data centers. We got to compete with China. But they're not doing that, which leads to some questions. And now they're politically positioning themselves very awkwardly, as I said, where they're coming out sort of against data centers, but at the same time, they kind of still want the donor money and they still want the cash into the government that gives them more power. So they're struggling to balance the two. So we'll talk about the real concerns and then some of the statements made by some people here in Kentucky, how their actions and statements are kind of lining up kind of funny. We'll continue to dig into it here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back in just a few short minutes. And you are back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So before the break, I was talking about how these data centers, of course, they're all struggling with messaging. We have Beshear coming out signing executive orders, despite the fact, as I played for you, his prior statements on it were that of, hey, look, let's not be too hasty, guys. After all, they could double, they could triple budgets in these areas. They could do a lot of things for the government. We know that when the government has more money, they've always done more for you. So they've struggled there. But then you also have the Republicans over in the legislature struggling with messaging as well. So you have Robert Stivers, as I mentioned in the last segment, coming out, writing an op-ed to support data centers, saying, hey, look, guys, keep an open mind. They can do wonderful things. Think of all the revenue your government could have. Think of all the money they could have to waste. They could waste more money than they're wasting now. And that's one part, it's worth pausing real quick there, just because as we look at both Republicans and Democrats talking about how much more money the government would have, how much better that would be. And for those of you that might sit there and think to yourselves like, oh, that's a really good thing. If for some reason you were born yesterday or something and think that when the government has a bunch more money, somehow your life gets better. Does your government waste money now? Because that's my point, right? So if your government's really so cash strapped, that it literally, without letting in data centers, they literally can't afford to do roads. Without letting in data centers, they can't afford to do schooling properly. Without letting in data centers, they can't afford this or that. Are they really that cash strapped? Because look at what they spend their money on now. Does it look wasteful? Are they not spending millions on things like, I don't know, travel and cash giveaways to businesses and everything else? Or instead, are they behaving like a government that's got some cash? Certainly they're not bare bones. They're certainly not stripped down to the bare basics. Nowhere they are. They're all have every single dollar would be carefully not wasted. Things like fraud and abuse would be treated with such high regard when it comes to government money that it would be unthinkable to do so. But instead, what do we have? We have a lot of waste. So it kind of leads me to think maybe more cash won't make them behave better. Instead, they'll just blow more money on stupid things, doing favors for their donor class or what have you. But putting that to the side, going back to the messaging thing. So you have Senator Stivers coming out a few weeks ago with his op-ed, but then you have Robbie Mills, the, I believe, Senate Majority Leader, Republican, Senate Majority Leader. So he's a part of that Senate leadership team here in Kentucky, that Republican leadership team, coming out with a post on social media saying, hey, look, he wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these giveaways they gave to data centers goes away, because just a few years ago, they voted for this revenue bill that included a 50-year sales tax exemption. That means these multi-billion-dollar data centers wouldn't have to pay sales tax, state-level sales tax on what they purchase. A tax giveaway literally worth millions, if not billions of dollars, considering think of all the servers, all the things, everything that they're buying to build up these data centers. They wouldn't have to pay 6% sales tax on. That gets pretty hefty. That's a pretty big giveaway. And so they've recognized that. So they're saying, look, we're going to pare that back. And I got to ask the Republicans in the legislature this question just real quick, because part of the reason why they're coming out messaging, say, hey, we got to pare that back, is because Republicans, especially in these rural areas, are getting a lot of heat because they voted for that before data centers end up becoming such a hot button issue. Before when leadership was like, just approve it, it's fine. And what spurred it on was the fact that in Louisville, a data center went in across the river, and they're like, well, we can't have that. We can't lose a business to Indiana. We need to go ahead and make sure we're giving them cash giveaways. But now things have shifted where obviously these data centers are struggling to even find a place that will accept them. So why would we hand out this cash money if they're trying to come in anyways and they're struggling and they're just handing out money hand over fist? We might as well take advantage. That's what they're saying essentially. So it hurts them both politically, and it gives them a thing that they can then cause as a win this next legislative session when they take it away and say, we took away the tax benefits for data centers that we gave them, but look at us, we did something. And, and there's people out there too, and this is always funny to me. There's people out there who will claim that tax incentives aren't the same, don't cost the government anything compared to cash giveaways. So you have deals like Ford, where we gave, $250 million cash on top of free land, free training projects, all the kinds of other things. Essentially, we gave them right around about $350-ish million in just cash money, in either direct cash or free things like land, like training programs, like paying for their company's training. We gave another company $110 million. So you have situations like that, and almost everybody sits there and says, yeah, that's a problem. But when it gets into tax breaks, and we mention things, it's been a pretty big story, not a huge story, but a sizable story, that this data center out in Mercer County, trying to be built next to Shaker Village there. The developer on that, or one of the developers of people involved, is a Brian Luffman. Brian Luffman, he opened up a bourbon bar in Lexington because he also owns Never Say Die Bourbon, I guess. And then he started threatening, what appeared to be threatening, allegedly threatening, I guess, a person who brought up, hey, you shouldn't go to this bourbon and drink this bourbon because they're building this data center. And he got all mad about it and sent her a message threatening to expose information about her. And so allegedly, he apologized for doing it. So it's not super alleged, but, depends on if you want to read that as a threat or not. That's up to you. Anyways, so that's created quite the back and forth. But, you take that situation. He got $1 million out of for building a $4 million micro distillery bar in Lexington. He got $1 million tax incentive, which is ridiculous. Not a single person is now going to travel to Lexington because Never Say Die Bourbon has a micro distillery there. It's one amongst, great, Lexington's got another micro distillery bourbon bar. Ooh, big deal. People are really going to travel. I'm coming in from Nevada for Never Say Die Bourbon because all of us have definitely heard of it even before this. Putting that to the side. But one of the defenses over that incentive I heard people say when I called that out is, hey, look, this is ridiculous, was that, hey, tax incentives, they don't cost the government anything. Why are you throwing such a fit about it? That is false. Here's why it's false. It does cost the taxpayers, okay? When businesses come into an area, no matter who they are, data center, regular business, doesn't matter. When they come into an area, they do have employees. They cause a strain on the system, whether it's a strain on infrastructure, a strain on services, police, fire. Obviously, more people living in an area, that can attract people in to the area. But more importantly, especially in rural areas, it doesn't necessarily mean people are moving into your county. Instead, they're moving, they're traveling there for work. So they're traveling over from other counties. So you end up having a county that has this employer come in, and you have people not living there, but working there, which is fine. But what ends up happening when you hand out those tax breaks is it's not just money you never were going to get that you now got. It's that you now have a situation where somebody's getting services and they're not paying the same amount in taxes as the business down the street. Now, as a whole, I'm going to say that, once again, I think government has too much money in general. Everybody deserves a tax break, but it should be even across the board. Everybody should have a tax break across the board. Everybody should be paying less in taxes. It shouldn't be you have to pay more in taxes to pay for the services and uses that this business down the street is getting, because they came into the area, they brought in more people, they brought in more stress on infrastructure. But because they got a tax break, they're not bringing in the same amount of revenue per capita based on it as the other businesses in the area or as the other people in the area would be bringing in. So your taxes do have to go up to be able to afford to pay for the services being provided to that business. And so this is like for an example, Churchill Downs got a huge property tax break from the city. There in Louisville. And people argued, well, if Churchill Downs doesn't get this, then it doesn't cost the government anything to give up tax right. Okay. Well, then how about the government give up all its tax right? If it's not a big deal, why don't we all just get the tax break? If it's just, money the government never would have had. Because, of course, they need the money to pay for the services and also to waste and give to their... And I hear all that. So anyways, That's the point. But here's my question to Republicans, what I was saying at the very beginning. How many times are you going to let this leadership burn you? How many times are you guys going to end up with egg on your face? This is to the Republican legislators. So many of you sit around without two brain cells putting together to think through your votes. I get it. You're getting told, there's a lot of bills being passed. There's hundreds of bills being passed. You can't study all of them. You rely on your colleagues. You rely on leadership. You rely on all these people to tell you it's a good idea. But how many times are you going to end up voting for something and get burned before you start thinking through what you're voting for? And this goes to Democrats too. This isn't a Republican thing. This is a Democrat thing. This is all legislators. I don't understand it. You got burned over your data center giveaway, your tax giveaway. You got burned over Ford. You guys got egg on your face from that. Now, granted, I'm not saying Democrats didn't vote for those things. They did. I'm not saying Democrats want to put those things in place. They would have. I'm not saying this makes somehow Republicans worse than Democrats or vice versa, even on this specific issue of not thinking for themselves. If anything, here in Kentucky, we do see a little more, there's a handful of people who are independently minded in our legislature, but to the rest of you that just basically what I call the NPC voters that just vote however leadership tells you to, how many times are you going to end up just voting for something and then looking horrible for doing it before you put your foot down and say, hey, I don't trust these people? You got the president of the Senate writing an op-ed 2 weeks ago about how we should all support data centers. A poll comes out literally at the same time saying over 75% of people are against hyperscale data centers. And you wonder, why is he doing that? And you didn't have to see that poll to know, hey, bud, this isn't, you may, from a sheer just political standpoint, whether you like him or not, just from sheer political, like just talking from a sheer tactic side of things, why would you do that, Robert Stivers? It's the dumbest things in the world. But anyways, we get back, we'll be talking about what should the governor, what should the legislature be doing to address, if they really want data centers, what should they be doing to address the concerns? We'll have that when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Delicious. Oh, what's in here? Oh, well, what's in my tumbler here, the Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler, available for sale at brewed.store, is 1776, a brewed coffee, a Kentucky proud product that's roasted right here in Kentucky, of course. You can pick yourself up a bag at brewed.store. Free shipping on orders over $85. And they're sold in per pound, both ground, whole bean, and K-cups. If you like your little K-cup machines, we have that for you too. And the best part is per pound, it's cheaper than most of the boutique freedom-loving coffees out there. And this one's made right here in your own backyard. I know that's fantastic. So pick yourself up. We've got 1776, a French roasted dark blend, which is historically funny because, of course, the French financed the revolution. And then also we have one of our other signature blends, Tyrant's Tears, a coffee that we meticulously harvest from famous tyrants like Annie Beshear, Pol Pot, and, of course, Mao. Additionally, we have other single origin coffees such as Cameroon Pea Berry, Kenya, Peru. Fantastic, fantastic blends. Go ahead and pick yourself up a bag today. Not only will you be supporting the show, but also you'll be putting in your mouth a delicious and tasty black nectar called coffee. So order yours today. Brewed.store. Once again, it's BREWED.store. Brewed.store. Free shipping. Orders over $85. Pick yourself up a bag and pick yourself up one of these spiffy tumblers. Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler today. Once again, that's brewed.store. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So I've kind of talked about both Beshear, Democrat leader here in Kentucky, and the Republican leadership here in Kentucky, and how they're struggling with this data center issue. But what's crazy to me, and what tells me that at the end of the day, they care more about, one, they don't have a lot of good foresight. Keep in mind, they have awful foresight, like horrible foresight. And so it is possible that they just don't believe these concerns I'm about to go through are real concerns. But even on that subject, even if you personally don't think this is a real concern, if you're a politician saying, I want these data centers, I got to get my citizens okay with them. If these things, these ideas I'm about to throw out there would assuage most of those people, then why wouldn't you just do it? If it really wouldn't affect anything, why wouldn't you just do it? And one of these things failed last session, and that was ensuring that power, because people have talked a lot about power, that power would not end up increasing the bills of citizens, that they would have to pay for their own power. There's a bill to go ahead and make sure that data centers couldn't do that, and it failed in the legislature. So, what should they do? Well, first, if Beshear wants to do, and if you actually read his executive order, you'll see it's nothing more than a pinky promise. Same kind of thing that Trump signed, like, oh, it's a pinky promise. They're going to pay for their own power. They're going to pay for all this own things, and they haven't thought it through. So let's talk about some of these things. And by the way, when I was talking about, not jump around too much, when I was talking about foresight, keep in mind, these are the same Republicans, same Democrat leadership, that when a battery plant for electric vehicles, something that we didn't even have the infrastructure for charging for really, was coming into Kentucky, they all threw $500 million almost, $410 million in cash, land giveaways, tax incentive, all kinds of things. Hundreds of millions in cash, just straight up cash to two companies, Ford and Envision AEC, I believe, AESC or whatever. Anyways, they did all that, and normal people that like have two brain cells to rub together were like, hey, this electric vehicle thing is like maybe the future, but it's like 10 years from being the future. We don't have enough chargers in place for this to be a real viable option for people. We don't have the infrastructure in place for charging these vehicles if everybody's on there. Also, the federal government's giving away literally billions of dollars in cash. You're giving away hundreds of millions of cash at each of the states at the state levels to make this thing work. You're not going to do that forever. When it goes away, when all those cash and all those incentives go away, what are we going to be left with? It's going to fall apart. But anyways, so let's first talk about electricity. There's a real concern people have that these that the power companies will end up passing on the cost of a data center coming in onto the citizens, onto the ratepayers. Now, here in Kentucky, not every state's like this, but here in Kentucky, the government has granted a monopoly to the power companies. You only have one power company you can go to. For this, they're more so regulated by the government as far as what they can charge and everything else, right? But they are still, quote unquote, private companies, and they own the lines and everything. That's why they have to repair the lines and send that out. Anyways, so Kentucky's a little bit different. So when people talk about, well, freedom, don't businesses have freedom to operate? I thought you're a liberty guy, a freedom guy, Andrew. Why are you getting involved? Well, if power was a free market, then sure, yeah. But it's not a free market in Kentucky. I have to buy my power from one company. Therefore, obviously, the decisions that company makes affects me, and I get more say-so. If the government hadn't granted them the monopoly, then that wouldn't be the case. But they have. So, on the power, there needs to be law passed saying that these data centers need to produce their own power. They cannot, at least in Kentucky, be buying power from a power company, period. They need to be building their own power source, period. That they own. That's it. Let me explain why. So for an example, you have this TeraWolf data center in like Greenup County area. They came out. This was just a few weeks ago saying they're very excited. They think they already signed a deal for 1 gigawatt of power from Kentucky Power. They're excited that they may expand that out to 2 gigawatt data center. 2 gigawatt data center. To put that in perspective, that's the same amount of power as the entire state of Kentucky's households poll. Literally the same amount of power as the entire state. I don't think Kentucky Power has literally all the households in the state of Kentucky, half of it, and just excess production laying out there. That means they're going to have to, I could be wrong, but I don't think they do. And based upon the fact that several power companies have gone to the commission that oversees them here in the state and said they want to build more natural gas power plants in order to specifically citing data center power needs as the reasoning behind it, I'm going to say they don't currently have the power. Now, you could say, Andrew, look, there's a tariff and everything else involved. These companies enter into agreements that says, look, we're going to go ahead and sign a contract saying we're going to draw this amount of power. And you can say, your rate won't be touched, Andrew. That's not how it works. That's not how power companies work. If a power company needs to build up specifically for one business, then they will build up for that one business, and then they will not pass the cost on to the ratepayers. Okay, I hear you. I understand in your perfect world you think that's how it works, but let me slap you with a little bit of reality here, okay? Suddenly we go from like no data centers to, it seems like dozens being built just here in Kentucky. And by no data centers, I know people are quoting, well, we already had 3,000 data centers. Where's your issue with that? Those are minor, we're talking hyperscale data centers drawing in as much power as entire states do. We didn't have any of those like before this, one or two, but not many. Now suddenly there's like 10 being built in every single state. And so while I do believe that some of this, obviously AI and all this compute power will be needed, I also know one technology advances, things get smaller. You take a look at your phone, same amount of computing power they had to put a man on the moon in your phone. And that computing power used to take up a warehouse. It now barely takes up one of your pants pockets. Technology moves. So it will get smaller. So that I think will play a part. And the way they handle this, they cool it. Maybe they move it to outer space. Maybe they do individual servers at everybody's house to handle your own data. That's better data security. I don't know what the future holds in technology, but what I do know is you're sitting here, technology moves fast, and you're talking about data centers that will take a few years to come online. And what is the guarantee 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they'll still be operational? And there's it's not like you're building this new data center is taking over steel plant site. It's not like you're building a steel plant where you're like, yeah, we're going to need steel forever. We don't know how much space we're going to need for computing. So the point is you've got two concerns coming from there, one of which does deal with power. That is that these power companies pull out a loan to build out for the demands of these data centers coming in. All hunky-dory, that data center goes out of business. Something happens, it's not being used anymore. That power company, who has a monopoly over providing you power, guess what? They now have a loan they have to service without the revenue from the data center coming in to pay it. Therefore, that's why I say protection immediately needs to be in place, saying that data centers have to produce their own power. And there's a more thing that's just on the power side of things. That's the only way in the state of Kentucky you can guarantee our power bills will never go up as a result of a data center coming onto the grid that you are on with the power company you are on, is by them never coming onto the grid in the first place. That's the only real way. Pinky promises, we promise. All goes out the window when a loan note needs to be paid by the power company and they don't got the revenue coming in from that giant data center to pay it. Well, we'll get back here in just a few minutes. We'll be back. Stay with us. Do you hear that? I do. It's Beshear crying. Why? Because you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And I thought to myself, why should we let those tears go to waste? Like any good capitalist, I said, that is a resource that can be sold. So we capture those tears from Andy Beshear and other famous tyrants like Pol Pot, Mao, whoever else. And we collect them up and we put them into a delicious coffee called Tyrant's Tears, available at brood.store. Once again, that's brood.store. You can pick yourself up a spiffy Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler while you're at it. and get yourself a nice bag. Free shipping on orders over $85. We have Tyrant's Tears in 1776, our signature blends. We also have flavored coffees such as Swiss chocolate and bourbon for those of you that want a little kick without the buzz from, well, alcohol. You'll get the buzz from the caffeine, though. Check out today. Brewed.store. This is a Kentucky Proud product, roasted right in your own backyard. Brewed.store. Support the show. It's cheaper per pound than most of those other boutique coffees. And it's available whole bean, ground, K-Cups. However you make your coffee, we got you covered. And you're back on this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So I've been going through things we need in place to deal with these data centers in order to make sure the citizens of the Commonwealth are protected. And I talked about, first and foremost, producing their own power, laid it out why that's important. You can try to disagree with me, but you know what? The logic's there, I think. But also, on the same tune of them going out of business of concern, they're building these giant buildings that they're so big, it's hard to imagine what else would need that amount of space. And so that's why I would also have in place a regulation stating that, look, if you go out of business, you have to post up a bond that covers the cost of demolition of this site or breaking up this site or something where the community can decide, what are we going to do with this building when you move on? Because you have these giant buildings that then nobody's going to move into because who needs a building that big? And what are you going to do with it? And so I think they need to post a bond up that says, hey, look, if that building goes vacant for 5 years or longer, that now that bond can be used for demolition. That building, we can choose to go ahead and get rid of that building. Basically, if we so choose to do so, the local government there and so on and so forth. And talking about local government, local control, this is where ultimately too, this comes down to local government's decisions. These data centers need to be industrial areas. Throwing one up next to Shaker Village, even with all the protections in place, putting up one on the middle of farmland in Mercer County next to Shaker Village is a horrible idea. Zoning does exist for a reason. And granted, I have issues with per se the government coming in and saying, look, you have to do X, Y, Z with your property. And what I mean by that is, the government coming in and saying, look, you cannot produce your own power. That is something, talking about these power monopolies. Not only do they have monopoly in the areas, but a lot of governments require a house to be connected up to the grid. You're not allowed to be off grid and power your own home. There's some communities like this. So I take issue with that. Like if I've got solar power, if I can produce enough power, enough water for my house, and my house doesn't look like it's in shambles, so it's affecting, everybody else's quote unquote property value, why does it matter to you? Right? A degree of reasonability when it comes to it. I remember there's this case here in Lexington. A guy's in an industrial area, wanted to park construction equipment on the land he has, an industrial area. And they're like, no, that's an eyesore. It's like, this is an industrial area. There's warehouses all around. Like, calm it down. It's not like he's in the middle of a neighborhood. Right? And I think that's part of it too, is that, okay, so you buy in an area, and when you purchase that area, you're purchasing for a way of life. And, maybe if we weren't paying like so much in property taxes, I would say, look, you buy land, it's your land to deal with, but your neighbor does whatever they want. That's on you. When you start getting in tight, homes right next to each other, everything else, in order for everybody to get along, yeah, there does have to be things in place so we don't encroach on each other's property, whether that's with noise, whether that's with pollution, other things like that. It does affect those around you. But when I say the government goes too far, sometimes they're going after things that literally doesn't affect anybody around you at all, which is kind of ridiculous. No collecting rainwater rules, things like that. So stupid. But getting back into the discussion though here at hand. So it's got to be put in industrial areas. That's easy. Don't ask for rezoning or everything else. Put it in industrial areas. Enough of them exist. If a county comes together and designates an area to be an industrial area, then that's where it can be built. You're not going to go out here in the middle of all of our farmland, pay $50,000 an acre. That's a real offer they made to a family in Madison County to sell hundreds of acres at like $50,000 an acre and drive up farmland like crazy, like stay to the industrial areas, right? So on the water side of things, they do draw in a lot of water. I mean, we just saw a permit Beshear administration approved out of his environment and cabinet for 2 million gallons a day. 2 million gallons a day. To give you an idea, that's the same amount of water as 15,000 households. They do draw a lot of water. And so you've got to be watching. That's a shared resource once again. So you got to have a law in place that says first, you're first cut off. For the data centers there, if there's a drought, if things are being cut short, you're first cut off. We had a, oh geez, I forget which county, but we had a county in this state where they weren't allowed to wash their cars. What was funny is they didn't want to close. I almost talked about this. This was just like a few months ago. Sorry, I can't remember which county it was. But they banned washing your car, but there were car washes in that county. And they didn't shut those businesses down because if you do that, according to the takings clause, you'd have to compensate them for shutting down their business for the greater good. So instead, they allowed those businesses to operate and said they could operate legally. But then if a citizen went to use the car wash, they would be fined. So the business was allowed to operate, but if a customer came in and used that business, the customer would be in trouble for doing so. Kind of crazy. But we've had some drought issues here in Kentucky across the board. So we've got to consider that as we're talking about these data centers. They have to be last straw. We're going to do strict water level monitoring. If it falls below a certain level and we're getting into drought phase, before you're not allowed to wash your car, before you're not allowed to run a sprinkler on your lawn or whatever else, before you're not allowed to do any of that, the data center gets cut off first. They're coming into a community. They want to use the natural resources. We're saying, look, we're not going to give up our way of life because the government thinks that doubling the school budget is somehow going to teach our kids math, even though they're spending $30,000 a student and it isn't working. So therefore, strict water level monitoring, and you're going to be cut off. First one to be cut off. Any kind of thing close to a drought, if we're worried about it, you're the first one to be cut off. So you got to build your own power. If it goes abandoned for 5 years, you're paying to get rid of that building if the community so chooses. You're last in for water, strict levels monitoring, and then also the noise. Got to consider the noise. Is it not supposed to go above a certain number of decibels or something like that at certain times? These are simple things. Also, too, absolutely zero taxpayer carve-outs. None at all. No taxpayer handouts, no special tax breaks, nothing like that. You get those things in place, and a lot of these citizens' concerns would at least be assuaded. They may not want a data center in their backyard. That's their choice to make. They may be against the idea of these, data centers being used to fund things like the flock cameras and everything else. They can be against it for that reason too. But what is driving 75% of people to be against data centers is concerns over those issues. And I'm sorry, but telling them the government's going to have more money isn't a selling point. It's not enough to get the job done. So, now, of course, do I think that, and if Beshear really wants to put those protections in place, he strikes a deal with the Republicans, he calls a special session, they get those bills passed, that becomes law. And now they can feel comfortable about, look, we regulated these data centers and now they can do great good for the community, but they're not going to pass any of those things. We're going to be lucky if they pass a law saying that a ratepayer's electric bill can't go up. They might still do it. It was considered last year. They tinker with it. Probably what ends up getting put out has a million loopholes and probably doesn't deal with the thing that I mentioned I'm most concerned about, that a power company takes out a loan to build out power capacity, and then the company that they pulled that out for, that one company they pulled that loan out for, goes bankrupt, and now the rest of us ratepayers have to go ahead and pay, our bill goes up to pay that loan. So will they have those protections in place? Probably not. But at least Are they going to do anything? Probably something along that, and that might be it. And take away the tax breaks. That might be it. So they can say they did something without really doing anything. Because they want the data. They all do. Whether it's Beshear, the Republic, it doesn't matter. They all want them. Because once again, it brings in the money. And it's really coming down to a test of how much do they want to listen to citizens and how much do they not want to. And I got to tell you this much. If you're a Republican and you're running, there's a lot of Democrats taking advantage of this issue. And if you pulled your heads out of your butts, you'd stop them from getting ahead on it. But instead, you got the, once again, president of the Senate writing op-eds. You know, where Beshear dropped the ball, you could have pushed on. Instead, you take his messaging points for him and, you know, then he gets the executive order and pretends he does something. It's just so stupid. Anyways, well, yo, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you all so much for joining me. I know it's been a little while, but we'll see you back here next week. Hope you have a great rest of your day.